Welcome to the Loud Little Ducky. Hey, y'all. We are doing our last witness in the Karen Reed retrial. There was another guy that testified and he did some measurements and stuff like that. He was an overqualified private investigator. He had many credentials. I think he had gone to law school and did some other things, and all he did was go measure some stuff at 34 Fairview. You can watch that on the trial channel. He's got a playlist. If you want to go watch that little bit of testimony that he did, you can go watch it over there. They are who I use for clips in this trial because it is just so nice and broken down very well. So you can get to the parts where you want to get to in the juicy stuff. So today we're going to talk about Dr. Rentschler. He is the other ARCCA guy. He is the biomedical engineer. He focuses more on the injuries part. And so we saw Dr. Wolf do the accident reconstruction and all that. And so Rentschler comes in with these numbers and everything and talks about what we would expect to see from an accident or things like that on the body. Remember, he was also one of the ones that was originally hired by the DOJ, the feds, and then later, after their report came out for the Commonwealth and the defense, and either side could contact them, the defense decided to contact them because they were good for their case. They do not think that there was a collision based on science. And so the defense used them last year. They were only allowed to talk about the report that they had done with the DOJ. They were not allowed to do extra testing last year. This year they were. The Commonwealths still did not care to talk to these guys. The prosecution, the DA, nobody wanted to talk to them because it didn't align with prosecuting Karen Reed, and they wanted to prosecute Karen Reed and convict Karen Reed. And the expert that the feds and the DOJ hired didn't go with that. So Alan Jackson does the direct. They talk about the head injury didn't come from a strike with the vehicle. They do tests to rule out or figure that out. They go over the scientific method, which you heard Alessi when he was crossing Burgess and Welcher on the scientific method. You know, do you have a hypothesis and then do you go from that? Or do you have confirmation bias, anchor bias, things like that? And, you know, Welcher didn't do this in his testing. And he said, you need to pay attention to clothes damage, body and the injuries and vehicle injuries, how the glass, the taillight could have broke and ended up on the lawn. They talk about John O'Keefe had abrasions, not lacerations. And let's go to, we're going to look at a list of John O'Keefe's injuries. All right, so let's bring that up. I'm going to share screen. All right. So the right arm injuries limited to superficial abrasions. Now, what in the medical world, what superficial abrasions are is they don't cut through other layers of skin. To us, some superficial abrasions don't seem like
extremities, it's superficial abrasion.
superficial abrasions. But they were. So here's what we have on John O'Keefe. Final diagnosis: blunt impact injuries of the head and extremities, subscapular hemorrhage, abrasions and lacerations, multiple skull fractures, base of skull and calvarium, subarachnoid and subdural hemorrhages. See report of neuropathy. Then the extremities, 3 centimeter superficial abrasions on the right medical upper arm, multiple abrasions from 2 to 3 millimeters and up to 7 centimeters on the posterior right arm and forearm, 2 red contusions on the dorsal aspect of the right hand, which is that bruise that we see that some say it might be from an IV. I think it looks like a paw print in a weird way. But you can decide. Faint abrasion on the dorsal aspect of left hand. Approximately 0.5 centimeter abrasion on the right lateral knee. And if we remember for Scortibello and Dr. Lapasato, or maybe it was Dr. Russell, one of them said that they had cut the leg open, looked at tissues and stuff around that bruising and stuff, and there was no internal bruising. We don't know how old the bruise was, but there was no damage to the inside tissues or anything like that with that tiny little 0.5 centimeter bruise. And if you got hit by a car, you're bruising with a 6,000-pound vehicle, as Hank Brennan likes to say. You would expect more than a 0.5 centimeter bruise. And then they get to extremity, musculoskeletal, other superficial abrasions, right forearm. Let's see here. The head was right superior orbital ridge region, approximately 7 millimeter laceration, surrounding soft tissue swelling and contusion. Eyes, ears, nose, great. Mucosa was moist. The abdominal was non-descended. There was no deformity to the back. And he didn't have a pulse. Neck, I can't really read what that says. It says no something stridor or something like that. But these are the injuries to John O'Keefe. Then let's see here. We'll pull this down for a minute. And then we're going to get to x-rays of the hand and the arm. And then they talk about no defects. There are 9 different holes in the arm of the hoodie, but there are 36 abrasions on the arm. So, okay. So 5823 for the hand x-ray. I don't know why it's doing the loop-de-loop. Okay. All right, here we go. Here is the hand x-ray. You can see that there are no fractures, not even finger fractures, to where his hand, if it hit the vehicle, you don't see any fractures in them. And, finger fractures are hard because a lot of times you can't really do much with a finger fracture or toe fracture. You just got to deal with it or maybe get it to pop back in place, but it just has to heal on its own. There's not like casting and stuff like they can do for other things. But that is his hand. And then let's see here. Here is his radius and his ulna. Um, no soft tissue damage or anything like that. No broken bone in that forearm. No broken bones in the wrist. Mm. And then here is the shoulder. So nothing in the elbow is broken. Then you have shoulder, doesn't show any dislocation or tissue issues. Tissue issue. um, Nothing broke in the shoulder. Even on the part of the ribs right here, we can see that nothing's broken on this part. Now, more towards the center, probably because of CPR and or the Lucas machine. And then the 9 holes in the hoodie that we see and counted for. And this cutting up the front, that was done by EMS with their shears to get the clothes off of John O'Keefe's body. That was not done in regards to anything. And then remember, looking at the holes, like I said, these little holes, they look like a dog or something got their tooth or claw and then took it out. They're tiny little holes, 6 millimeters, 5 millimeters, 3 millimeters, some of them even smaller than that of this shirt. They measured the some of the arm injuries and the directionality of them, which these are kind of at a diagonal angle. Um, and so they just did that. He brings up a picture of this is how John or Welcher measured the arm injuries just by eyeing it and then, did the grease paint, had John O'Keefe's arm with the hoodie, and then Karen Reed's tail light. I don't know if there's one that he shows with. And this one is interesting because this shows. This is Welcher's testing. And he did a paint transfer test in respects to the arm. That that's not the one where they show here. All right. And so then they put in here different positions that the arm could be in. It could go from this position to this position to this position. And how the different abrasions would look. This is the one you get to see him rolling into it, maybe. Now, here's where he compares his arm to John O'Keefe's arm. He's like, see, looks the same. Paint transfer everywhere. But if you look at this one that's down by his wrist, his paint transfer test does not cover this area down by John O'Keefe's wrist. So where would that one have come from? All right, and then let me see if this one is this where we get to see. All right. All right, we should get to see here in here in a minute. All right, we'll play this real quick.
On the right, what did you note as the car, just before the car starts to make contact with the surrogate? What did you note?
So in order to get that pattern on the arm, right as the car contacts the arm, the surrogate pushes his elbow forward, leans into the car against the light, and then rolls off.
Can you play that for us, please? Did you see what you were describing in that video?
I did, and I can slow it down. So you can see, even at this point, as the car approaches, it would not contact the elbow or the bicep. So as it comes in, watch the elbow all of a sudden shoot in. Surrogate turns his arm in and then leans against the light cover. So this is not indicative of someone standing there and having a car back into their arm. In order to get that pattern of pain on the arm, someone would have to stand there, and as the car approached and contacted the arm, they would have to actually push their arm forward and lean into it to get that pain pattern.
Is that, in your view,
So if you just saw, he brought his arm in and he rolled into it, which we've talked about on other videos. He didn't just stand there naturally. He had to make sure that his arm shot inwards, which I doubt John O'Keefe made sure his arm did that. And so, you know, they talk about the blue paint test and showed where an arm can line up with the tail light. That test didn't show any direction of the wombs. If the arm is at a 90-degree direction, the wounds would be horizontal, not vertical, and diagonal, and if done by a car. The taillight and John O'Keefe's arm injuries don't correspond the way Welcher said so, and that is Rentschler's opinion. What Welcher said is not true, is what he thinks. The taillight in the body would have gone same direction as the car in reverse. It wouldn't have been on the lawn to the side of the vehicle, in my opinion. Because when we've seen those tests, we see the stuff goes in the road and down with the vehicle. Randy and the vehicle both go back. Randy doesn't end up over to the side, and like the taillight pieces don't end up on the side of the lawn on 34 Fairview. It should all be in the road. So the fact that some of these pieces were near a fire hydrant, near a flagpole, and then some random pieces just throughout the yard is crazy, in my opinion. Some of these pieces were found on top of footprints. How does that make any sense? Because you stepped on it, but you didn't see it. You stepped on a red taillight piece, but you didn't see the red taillight piece. But now all of a sudden this taillight piece is on top of a shoe print in some of these evidence photos. It's bizarre. If the hand or the elbow hit, he would have had bruises and fractures. The forearm taking a hit of 600 to 1,200 pounds at 10 miles an hour would have broken. Then if you get at 24 miles an hour, 1,400 to 2,800 pounds of force, which is them doing the speed and the mass and all that physics stuff that they're talking about. We looked at the photo of Welcher's report. He says he was not struck center of mass. There were no injuries to show. John was hit by a car. Welcher kept saying this. Oh, or not Welcher. I'm sorry. Dr. Rentschler, kept saying that John O'Keefe was not hit by a car. He does not believe there was a collision. He does not believe his arm was struck. He doesn't believe John O'Keefe was struck by a vehicle. That he disses Welcher's article that he got from 1979, which is 46 years old, that Welcher cites the head being the most common injury in a vehicle crash is wrong. He says the first modern SUV wasn't even created until 1984. So a 1979 article would have never taken into consideration an SUV. It would have only taken into consideration maybe a car or a truck. So, then they talk about the lividity is going towards John O'Keefe's back, not the front. That Welcher used a 50% dummy for the drop test, and Welcher did adjust the weight calculations correctly. So even though with Dr. Wolf, Hank Brennan was like, oh, you used a 50% arm and you used this, and why did you use the lighter arm rather than the arm that weighed closer to the statistic of an arm weight? Well, Welcher used a 50% dummy as well. And when Welcher did the calculations on the 50% dummy, he adjusted the weight calculations correctly, which is what Dr. Wolf was trying to explain to Hank Brennan, that we do adjustments in our calculations. And it's not a 26% take off speed and 20% taken off the weight and 26% taken off acceleration or velocity or whatever other physics numbers. I am not the expert in that at all. I hated physics. Give me chemistry all day long. I do not like physics. But he was even saying Welcher did his calculations correctly on that part. And that John O'Keefe would have had to rotate 270 degrees for the fall back based on an arm hit only on taillight. Let's see here. Okay, there's another part that I want to get to. All right, let me get to this piece. Because Rentschler shows this really good diagram. Okay. All right. So this diagram was interesting because it is showing the different calculations and at different speeds how much force or G's or something is what these are that the hand would have taken if it was holding this drinking glass, and if its hands and its knuckles and everything would have hit the vehicle. And it talking about all the, those areas that would have possibly been hit and the force that they would have taken. Then he shows that, this is an article, protected and unprotected hands and the impact loading. So he's showing, literature that backs up what he is saying here. the mechanisms of the elbow fractures and the mass or force that it could break these things, and then peak forearm forces that from ARCCA's testing, that this is the amount of forces that would have been on the forearm at the 10 miles an hour all the way to 29 miles an hour, and how much force that would actually be taking. And to get, you got a 6,000-pound vehicle going 24 miles an hour in reverse. The arm is taking about 1,419 pounds of force when it's being hit. That's going to shatter something. If your hand takes that, geez Louise, you're at least going to have some knuckles or something messed up. What is this article that he brought up before we get to the end? Here's another article: vehicle pedestrian collisions, validated models for pedestrian impact and projection. If you want to stop here and read this, you can. I will let you. But basically, oh, where did it go? Now we're going to the round and round. But we're fixing to get into cross-examination. Because we basically covered. They go over the drop fall test, which we discussed, and he did the calculations right. I really don't know why it's doing that to me. Okay, we'll take that down for now. So then Hank Brennan gets up to do his cross. And Hank Brennan starts off with, you said facts matter, right? And he said, I said details matter, but yeah, sure. So he's like, facts matter. The details matter. Yeah. Like he agrees with you. Why are you yelling this? And he says, you don't know where the point of impact on John O'Keefe's body is, do you? And he says, no one does. I mean, there's no evidence of an impact site on John O'Keefe's body. So no one knows where the impact was. I mean, the taillight, some impact was done from something, but it wasn't John O'Keefe and a taillight on 34 Fairview. It was that taillight and something else, but it wasn't John O'Keefe. Do you know the distance traveled from the road to the yard? Like a 10 to 20 foot estimate. Then he talks about the 50% dummy not being the exact thing to John O'Keefe, which, okay, no. But he said in his direct that Welcher did his calculations and adjusted for them, just like we did, and that Welcher did calculations correctly in regards to, adjusting the weight. Because there's a formula for it, Hank, even though you don't understand that. There is. He talks about last year you got info from the feds during trial. He couldn't say feds, but he was like, from your employers. Well, no. No, he didn't get information from his employers because his employer is ARCCA. He got information from the feds. That was one of ARCCA's clients that he was working for. But the feds, the DOJ, is not his employer. But he kept saying that the feds were his employer. No. Now, maybe if they were independent, maybe they had a contract. But ARCCA is who pays them. Like the DOJ didn't pay Dr. Rentschler and Dr. Wolf. The DOJ paid ARCCA. The defense paid ARCCA. They didn't have any carve out cash exchange between any of them personally. He said, did you talk to the defense about how to look independent? Well, he doesn't need to look independent. He was independent. Like, there's no trying to get you to look. They were independent, and you know they were, Hank. So you trying to say that they weren't independent when they got involved in this case? That's just not true. They didn't even know who Karen Reed was. They didn't know who the defense was. They didn't know anything. They were just said, hey, will you look at this and figure this out? Tell me if a car did this to this person. You know, it wasn't until later that they found out. They didn't know the defense. And you could have called them yourself, Hank, and used them independently. But, that wouldn't go with your story. And then get into okay, I want to get into the ham sandwich of it all because we just kind of have to. Let's see, the ham sandwiches. We'll just start.
Well, I was waiting for my ride, and to get back to the airport, they had to take other people, and so they were having a lunch afterwards, and they said, come have a sandwich, and then your ride will take you to the airport. So I went, and I had a ham sandwich.
You had a ham sandwich. Did you testify at some point that after you had something to eat, you just stood in the corner?
I did. I sat at a table, ate, and then went over and literally stood in the corner waiting for my ride.
When you sat at the table and eat, did you just eat your ham sandwich, or did more go on?
I ate. People were talking. I really didn't talk much at all.
Did you listen?
Well, certainly, I'm sure I did, sir.
Did you laugh a lot?
I assume if something funny was said, I'd probably laugh.
Did you talk about your testimony?
I don't, at this point, I don't even remember.
Let me look at something. When you were there at the luncheon, did you see a camera crew
I believe I did, yes, sir.
filming and documenting, right?
There were a lot of cameras, yes.
You know that you might have been on some of that footage?
That's fine. I could care less.
So do you think maybe you were talking about the case and your answers and laughing it up a little bit?
I have no idea, possibly.
You were involved in conversations with the defense attorneys, were you?
What do you mean conversation, sir? I had just gotten done testifying. I was having lunch. Whatever was spoken about at the table, I'm sure I heard.
You know what a conversation is when someone speaks to you and you answer.
Sure.
Did you have conversations with some of these folks?
Sir, I can't remember conversations I had last week, let alone a year ago. So I probably did, but I have no clue what we would have talked about.
Do you remember accolades you might have been receiving because you had given certain answers to the then prosecutor on the case and laughing about the answers?
I have no idea. I can't remember last week what I had for lunch last Tuesday. How would I remember a conversation from over a year ago?
You remember when you were having conversations with some of these folks and you were laughing about the prosecutor asked you about other evidence like DNA, you had a response about physics, doesn't change? Remember?
I don't specifically remember that, no, sir.
How long were you at the table eating your ham sandwich with the folks there enjoying the event? How long do you think that went on for?
I honestly don't know. 10 minutes. How long does it take you to eat a ham sandwich? 10 minutes?
And after you finished your ham sandwich and then you told us you stood in the corner, you got a ride back to the airport?
I did, yes, sir.
Yeah. After you got back to the airport, ultimately your company billed the defense for your time preparing and collaborating and testifying?
I believe they did.
Okay. So he gets grilled about his ham sandwich for like 3 minutes. You were eating a ham sandwich in the corner, just sit by yourself. Did you laugh at anything? Did you make comments or chuckle at the prosecution? Yeah, probably because the prosecution seems to say funny things. It's like, how dare you how dare you laugh? How dare you wait on an Uber and eat your sandwich and talk to people? Like, really? Like, while he's waiting for his ride to go to the airport after he testified. He had to wait. Why not kill it with eating a ham sandwich? Because buying a ham sandwich or something to eat at the airport is really expensive. And if Hank thinks that this person can be bought into giving favorable testimony with the ham sandwich, you're out of your mind. And I understand a ham sandwich can be good, but not that good, not enough to destroy your career. Um, so it just, um, he talks about I'm a salary employee. I don't know how much ARCA made on this case, um, from the feds and the defense. He said you worked with Scott Klein and Dr. Wolf. Um, He said, yeah, Scott Klein and Dr. Wolf are out of the Philly office, and that Rentschler's office is in Pittsburgh. Um, could you have asked to do crash tests? Maybe use the crash test dummies from the feds? And he said, well, I don't know. It might not have been in the budget. Like those crash test dummies we heard were really expensive, like $150,000 a piece. The feds may not have wanted to spend that amount of money. He has been peer reviewed, but he hasn't been peer reviewed since 2003. And then he gets into talking about his dissertation. And Hank Brennan's like, oh, your dissertations are just about wheelchairs. Okay. Like, oh my God, he's trying to look at forces of wheelchairs or maybe how wheelchairs can be safer or different mechanisms of that. Maybe somebody in his family was in a wheelchair. Maybe a loved one was in a wheelchair during that time period and was sick. And so it just was important to him at the time. Um, but really, you're going to give him shit about writing dissertation papers um, with physics and wheelchairs? Like, he's like, but you didn't write anything on pedestrian collisions. Like, seriously, Hank? I just don't I did not like the way he went after some of these experts. Um, and it seemed like he just didn't care anymore after the X-ray thing came out and the hoodie stuff came out about him misrepresenting the hoodie and the fact that Welcher said there were no X-rays and the defense showed yes there was X-rays. Look at them. Um He says you would expect to see damage to tissue, ligaments, tendons, bones in the shoulder, wrist, and elbow, if John O'Keefe had been hit by a car. Let's see here. Okay. Um, he says you can't show something occurred if you don't know what happened. Um, which, yeah, I guess you can't fully. And that's what Brennan was saying. Like, you can't show something if you don't know how it happened. What was your expert trying to do, Brennan? And you can make hypothesis as to how things happened. Like, you do the things to see if we do this, does it end up with this outcome? Does it align with this breaking of the tail light? Does it align with injuries? You can do these experiments to figure these things out. And that was why Alessi focused on scientific method, as you can come to a question, test, come up with a hypothesis of what you think your answer is, test that hypothesis, and give the results. And then if you need to maneuver, you can maneuver and start the scientific method all over again. I mean, we were taught this in grade school. He says, I'm a biomedical engineer, so I am qualified to talk about vehicle accidents and reconstruction kinematics. Hank Brennan's Rentschler says, you can't prove this happened. The medical examiner said x-rays showed no fractures, and the ME said superficial abrasions. Because he's like, well, you're not a medical doctor, and you're just regurgitating what the ME said. And that's why he put that in his PowerPoint. And he's like, well, yeah, the medical examiners and people that examined the body said that this wasn't true. So I didn't diagnose that. They did. And I'm going to go off of what they said, because they said there were no fractures. And then looking at the x-rays, I can see that there's no fractures. So, yeah. They talk about, well, there was no MRI, so we don't know if tissue damage or muscle or tendon tears or nerve injuries. And then he says you can't use a dummy to do tests, skin cuts. He said, well, ARCCA didn't do that. Like, we didn't do that test on a dummy. So, like, no, we're not doing a skin cut test. I believe it was Ian Runkle that talked about doing a dot test and seeing when your arm went with those dots or something on the tail light, even if you rolled into it and stuff, what direction would those dots of paint have gone on the arm? Which was interesting. But yeah, he's like, no, we didn't do that. Hank Brennan keeps saying you don't know if Welcher was proving John O'Keefe's arm was bent to get his conclusion. And I'm like, oh, Welcher and all of us were like, well, then what was Welcher trying to prove with the arm being bent? And that if you roll into a car, the car rolls into you. If your arm is this way, that's how those injuries can happen. If he wasn't trying to say that's what happened. Hank Brennan thinks that not what Welcher was claiming his arm position was that. Britton says you don't know the arm and the way the arm was positioned. You don't know the speed John O'Keefe was hit, how and where he landed. Well, y'all been talking about 24 hours for 2 years. Last year, y'all said 24 hours. This year, I think y'all said somewhere between 13 and 24. Y'all tried to make it seem more, but if you actually look at the data, 24 was the highest that it got, and it actually decreased after that on that 1162 data. Said Welcher is there to show that the way the Commonwealth said this happened doesn't match to what actually happened. The body would not have been thrown in these tests. Rentschler says that he doesn't think the arm was hit by the Lexus. He evaluated distributed force across the arm. Hank Brennan talks about a book and high heels and hitting a forehead and being different even if the force was the same, which that was weird because he's like, well, if you had a book and a book hit you in the forehead and the book went the same speed or had the same amount of force behind it as a high heel to your forehead, like they're going to leave different injuries. And why are you talking about books and high heels, sir? Is this some kind of fantasy that you read about? Because we don't need to talk about that during trial. But he said it depends on what the force was or the speed. Because, I mean, if you tap the high heel and you tap the book, they both could leave no marks. One is going to be sharper than the other. So, you know, it, it would just depend on the things. He asks about the debris field. Did you consider the debris field? Did you look at the debris field? He said if the injuries and the biomechanics don't match the other stuff, the debris field can come from something else. Like he had to figure out first, was there a collision? Was John O'Keefe hit by this 6,000-pound Lexus of Karen Reed's? And first, you figured that out. And so he tested and said, okay, this couldn't have happened. So therefore, this collision did not cause all this taillight and stuff and his body to end up where it was. If I don't think there's a collision, then that stuff got there some other way. I don't know what way, but it wasn't from a collision. If there was a collision, then he could look at all that other stuff. But nothing in all the testing that he has done in the last 2 years, basically, has shown that there was a collision. No science has proven this. And so he doesn't care to look at the debris field and everything first. He says that's like putting the cart before the horse. The horse usually comes first and then the cart. We don't want to do it the other way because then it can mess up things. But that's kind of what Welcher did, was put the cart before the horse, because he's like, okay, there were taillights everywhere, so that means there was a collision. So let me show how this collision would have happened to make these marks on my arm. And that is not the approach that ARCCA took. They said, okay, let's figure out if a collision happened. And then if we can figure out that there was a collision, we can look at the rest of everything else. If we rule out a collision, well, then we're at an impasse because we don't have a way to know how those pieces ended up getting there if it wasn't a collision. That is for somebody else to figure out. Did you consider the taillight and the glass that were found and the hat and the shoe? What about the pieces in John O'Keefe's car? And he says we can't conclude a collision based on one piece of evidence. So you can say you can have a bunch of pieces of evidence. And if you look at one, it might suggest this, but it could be from this. And the whole purpose of doing these experiments and science and everything else is to figure out if what we think is correct. Yes, of course, if you look at tail light on a lawn and a dead body, you might think, yeah, there was an accident. But it doesn't always mean there was an accident. Um, y- there's been times where bodies have been found in certain places and the evidence, you're like, okay, but then the evidence shows you that's not where they died. But their body was there, but they didn't die there. And you have to do that from looking at all the clues. This wasn't there, all of this. And the thing is when Proctor and all them concluded this was a car collision, they had not found any pieces of taillight. They had not seen Karen's SUV. They had not gone into the house. They just saw John O'Keefe's body and talked to Jennifer McCabe and the firefighters. And I believe they found a drinking glass. They hadn't gotten into the phones, nothing. They knew that there was a shoe missing. They didn't know how. They knew nothing about taillight pieces. So that's the thing, is they didn't follow the evidence. They just were like, "Okay, let's go with what Jennifer McCabe says." And then all of a sudden there's taillight pieces. So it's like, "Okay, let's make this cut and dry," because it involved officers, as Proctor said to his buddies. Make this cut and dry by putting some taillight pieces maybe on the yard. So that we had a dead body, a shoe was off because they can be, kicked out of their shoe, and taillight pieces everywhere, and her taillight is broken, equals car accident. Nobody's going to question us. Except you got questioned and you did not do a proper investigation. You didn't document things. And why you didn't is a question, because there are other cases where you have dotted your I's and crossed your T's. But in this case, for some reason, you forgot how to investigate. You forgot how to preserve and collect evidence. Oh, it was snowing. I'm sorry. You've processed crime scenes in a snow. Maybe not the blizzard of all blizzards, but it's Massachusetts. Crime happens in the winter, whether it's a robbery or something. It can't be the first car accident that somebody has died in the winter. Like, they the way they act like it's DFW, Texas, and how they don't know what to do when it snows, it's like, dude, you're from up north. Like, I don't even know if Texas makes those excuses when it's snowing. Um, you should know how to do it. And I think you do know how to do it. You just didn't do it right. Um, and then they talk about the piece of glass on the nose, which AJ gets into on redirect. But before we go into redirect, let's look at some clips of cross-examination. So our next timestamp is 3:04:26. Let's see here. All right, let's listen here. Let's add this. I'm going to mute myself for a second while this plays.
There's a lot of literature with respect to the hybrid dummy, yes.
Have you ever heard of the person by the name of Stanley Bakatis?
I don't recall that I have.
Okay. How about Harold Mertz? Isn't he a leader in the field of crash test dummies?
He is, yes.
Would you agree that we also do not believe the current instrumented arm configuration is suitable either for prediction of soft tissue injuries? Would you agree with that?
Well, for laceration, sure, it shouldn't be used for that. It shouldn't be used in that manner. That's why I don't use it in that manner.
Okay, so that was the part where he was saying, I don't use the crash test dummies in a manner to figure out skin lacerations. Let's continue.
Do you have any source that says it's suitable for determining superficial abrasions?
I do not, no, sir.
You have no other sites whatsoever supporting that proposition, which led inevitably to one of the opinions you gave to this jury, true?
No, not true. That's a misrepresentation of what I performed, the testing that I performed, and the results that I analyzed in this case.
Now, you've talked a lot about Dr. Welcher's pain test. You don't have any information that Dr. Welcher ever claimed that his test was intended to represent exactly how Mr. O'Keefe's arm was when he was hit, do you?
Well, the evidence I have for that is that in his report, he says that the orientation and position of the lacerations are consistent with the orientation position of the tail light cover. And then right under that, he has reference to that test that he performed. So again, if he didn't intend to do that, then there's no evidence that he can provide with respect to the arm impact at all. That's the only test that was performed to look at the arm and the tail light cover. If it doesn't represent the actual position, then apparently he has no idea how the arm was positioned or how it was impacted.
Let's get back to my question.
So Hagberg is saying, we don't know what Welcher was trying to prove or show with his accident reconstructionist or demonstration or his blue paint test. Well, he explains in a report what he was doing. But if you're saying no, he's not trying to show what we think happened, what the hell is he doing? Is he just there for shits and giggles? Like, what is the point of it if he's not there to show us how this happened? That was your witness, Commonwealth, Brennan, to show how John O'Keefe could get hit by a car and have those arm lacerations with a drinking glass in his hand. And if it wasn't, then what are we doing here? Because if you take him away, you really don't have a case. But Welcher wasn't there to show us how this all could have gone down. I don't know why he was there, but Hank Brennan says he was not there for that. So, I mean, we apparently need to trust Hank Brennan that Welcher was there just to show paint transfer and nothing else. I have no idea. Let's continue on this.
Yes.
Is there anything where Dr. Welcher has informed you or written that he is intending to represent the actual arm angle of John O'Keefe when he was hit by a Lexus?
Again, I just described what he has in his actual report. So he didn't write specifically that that's what it's intended to do. It seems he's inferred that. And again, that's the only test that he's performed or referred to in this case.
You inferred that?
Inferred that that's how he believes that the arm was positioned?
I think we understand your perspective is that the only test he performed, but what I really want to get at is your conclusion, your assumption that Dr. Welcher was suggesting that there was a specific arm angle that occurred in this case that he was identifying. You don't see that anywhere in his report.
Well, it would be pretty odd if the one test he ran didn't actually represent what he thought happened. I don't understand what the value of that would actually be.
Did Dr. Welcher ever represent that he was trying to describe the actual body position of John O'Keefe when he was hit?
Actually, he doesn't state that. He states very little in his report or in his PowerPoint. He demonstrates through the video of his arm like that and contacting it, and then he holds his arm up to a picture of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm to compare and apparently demonstrate that it's in the same area. But again, he doesn't actually state that opinion. He doesn't state any opinions that the contact actually occurred, except in one point, and has no evidence or foundation for that.
Would the answer to my question be no?
You would have to ask Dr. Welcher, I suppose, but if it's not, again, then I'm not sure what that test actually accomplished or represented.
You've made assumptions, and then have given opinions to this jury based on your assumptions, haven't you?
I've evaluated the evidence in the one test he ran. If that's incorrect, well, then I would have to correct my opinion and my assumption and say, not only is the test not actually show what occurred, but he hasn't performed anything to actually link the arm contact to the taillight cover. If it doesn't represent that, you're right, I changed my opinion that there's no evidence, no analysis, no conclusion whatsoever.
I'm going to try to make my question a little clearer.
So he's like, okay, then I'll say you didn't prove. If he's not there doing that, like, what was the point in it? He didn't say that was the angle. Well, then why did he put his arm that way? If that's not what he was trying to show. Actions speak louder than words, and his video and his arm positioning speak way louder than him writing words down. But, okay, Hank, like, it doesn't make any sense. So that was interesting. He's like, well, all right. Let's go to 22:26. All right. We'll start here. Okay. Mute myself so we can start this part of the video.
Okay. You have no information about the angle of Mr. O'Keefe's body at the time the defendant's Lexus was traveling backwards on January 29, 2022, do you?
We have no information that he was even hit by the Lexus. So there wouldn't be any information on the angle if his body wasn't hit.
When you talked about force equations with this jury, you cited a number of pieces of literature, didn't you?
I did.
And there's an instance where he's like, we don't have any evidence that he was even hit by a vehicle. So when you say there's a collision or an alleged collision, we don't have any information on that. And Hank's questioning is horrible because he keeps allowing people like Rentschler and Dr. Lapasato to keep saying, I don't think he was hit by a car. There's no evidence he was hit by a car. No evidence that there was a collision. It's just really something when you have a defense witnesses get up there and say, you haven't proven anything. What you're saying happened didn't happen in their opinion. And they're experts and they're allowed to give their opinion. Welcher did something, and apparently his opinion was not his opinion, according to Hank Brennan. So there's that. Okay. And then let's get to the hat and what Hank Brennan gets to talk about here. And he gets to have someone put this idea in the jurors' minds. It's just, it's so weird to see somebody just imploding their case so badly. And that's why I think after the x-rays and the hoodie thing, Hank Brennan just didn't care anymore or something, like he had given up. I don't know. It was just bad. So I'm going to mute this and then okay. And then we're going to watch.
Part of my biomechanical analysis. There's a number of ways a hat can end up in a yard.
Is one of those ways being in a collision with a Lexus?
I suppose that's a possibility, or someone could put it there. I mean, there's a number of different possibilities as to when or how a hat may appear in a yard.
Who do you think put it there?
Well, I have no idea. I haven't seen any evidence of how it got there, and frankly, it's immaterial to a biomechanical analysis.
Do you have a theory you want to share with us about planting evidence? Is that what we're getting at, sir? By the way, the x-rays you looked at earlier, when's the first time you saw those?
I saw those when I was on the case initially for the first trial.
No mention in your report about reviewing those.
It says I reviewed medical records and reports. That's how I actually word in every report I have. I just put generally that it refers to medical records and reports, which includes x-rays, MRIs.
Exhibit 74, please. Have you seen this photograph?
I have, yes.
Okay. In your studies or your testing, did you determine how Mr. O'Keefe's shoe ended up near the curb?
No, sir.
Exhibit.
So he's like, I don't know how the hat got there. I mean, one possibility is that a collision could have thrown it off. It would have been nice to know how far John's hat was from where his body laid. It wasn't something they found when snow blowing or leaf blowing that area. So the hat flew off his head, which, okay, hats can sometimes do that. Um, and then landed afar. Um, which, let me see that hat picture again. Does it look like, no, you can't see. I was trying to see if you could see it, if it was by the flagpole or by the fire hydrant, and you can't tell from that picture. Um, but measurements would have been nice, right? How far away was the hat from John O'Keefe's body? There's nothing about that in there. Okay, so then they get into, redirect and AJ gets up and says they, meaning like the DOJ, feds, provided information. None of that information was given to you by anybody connected to the defense in any way. And he says, no, the defense didn't provide me with any of that information. He said that it didn't affect his testimony or opinions. ARCCA did not give him the info either. It was the organization / client that gave the information during the trial last year. That was their way to be able to explain that the defense wasn't the one breaking sequestration orders or talking to their witnesses in between their testimony. That so you don't need to fault the defense for that. Like the defense wasn't misbehaving. Um, they talk about this wasn't a fender vault, which usually fender vaults deal with the front hitting of a vehicle. He explains that the center mass is considered the belly button, and if you're hit below center mass, you could flip and do like somersaults or roll off the car and stuff like that. Alan asks him, you were shown pieces of plastic at 34 Fairview, but you don't know who, what, or when those were put there or landed there or whatever. None of it was discovered in the first search, which it wasn't. None of the plastic was discovered in the first search. And then he said, would a collision have caused the glass to go into the left side of John O'Keefe's nose? And if his right arm was hit, so, he's saying if his arm was hit and he was standing like this, I mean, could he have been turned like this and then maybe it went in? Possibly, but he's saying, if he was hit in his right arm and then he had the piece of glass stuck to the left side of his nose, that the glass would have to fly past the right side of the nose to the left side of the nose, and then do a U-turn and land on the nose. And why is the glass gonna go whoosh and then go back and hit him in his nose? Um, and we heard that for it to impale somebody, the pieces would have to be going faster than the speed of the body and things like that. And then somehow it would have to have force to go back here. But maybe if he was turned all the way his head and his left, he was turning away from it. So his left face and his right arm, maybe, but it still would have, those pieces would still have to be going faster than the speed of the body. And usually the pieces in the body and the vehicle are all traveling at about the same speed. Um, if force is pushing them out of the way or pushing through it. Um, and it's, was there a collision? You know, he says no, based on a biomedical scientific, certainty thing. Then Hank Brennan gets up on recross and, you know, um, he says, "Do you think that John O'Keefe was clipped?" And he said, "No, I don't think he was clipped." Um, he said he didn't know if John O'Keefe had glass in his hand, um, if he had a glass in his hand. Um, which we know that according to Karen Reed, John O'Keefe got out of the car with some glass. Um, but was it the glass that she took from CF McCarthy's? Or was it his glass he took from the waterfall? Um, and also, we don't even know fully, at least in this trial, um, if the waterfall glasses and cups or the CF McCarthy's glasses and cups match John O'Keefe's glass that he had. Because if we say it was Karen Reed's glass, Karen Reed's glass was a tall cylindrical glass. The one that was found at the scene with John O'Keefe was like a shorter, like a whiskey glass almost, short rocks glass. Um, so it wouldn't have been that one from CF McCarthy's. They would have to compare it to the glasses at the waterfall to find out if they were even the same consistency. Um, he said, "Do you add common sense to your opinion?" What, really? Really, Hank? Um, and if you don't like the physics or the science, too bad. It is what it is. And we'll listen to that clip here in a minute, but Hank was like, "And that's what y'all were laughing at the luncheon." That maybe he said that was funny, that the prosecution, like, after he gave his testimony, he was like, if they don't like the science and the physics and all that, too bad, because it is what it is, and you can't argue with science." And so, yeah, I guess if you wanna say that that was them laughing at the Commonwealth because just because you say something is true doesn't mean it's true, and if the science and the data or the data says something, it doesn't mean it is that thing. If you have proof saying this is not the thing, And so I get that's what they were laughing at. I guess he had a clip or something of maybe him saying that. Judge Beverly Cannoni did not allow that clip to be played. But he's like, you have to accept the science. And he says, well, how did the tail light break? He says, I don't know. There's no evidence showing us how it broke. So let's look at kind of the ending of cross or recross. And how this ends. And this is the last thing before before closing statements that the jury will hear evidence-wise, because they can't even take notes during opening or closing because what the lawyers say is not evidence. So this is the last tidbit of information they are allowed to take notes on and to take in as evidence, because Hank Brennan didn't put on a rebuttal after all the talk of he was going to put on a rebuttal. He was going to bring Welcher back. Figured out that wasn't a good idea because the defense was going to ask Welcher, why did you say there were no x-rays? And his answer would have been, I didn't see them. The Commonwealth didn't give me those. And so then it looks like the Commonwealth didn't give their experts all the information so that they could come to a proper conclusion, or he lied about there not being any x-rays and he did look at them. Either way, it's not good. They were going to call the dog DNA person. Possibly. They decided not to do that. They decided not to call their dog expert. They also decided not to call Marie Hartnett back, who was the criminologist who cut the holes herself in the hoodie. And the defense would be able to get up there and show the hoodie in the condition that it was got in and how it looked on January 29, 2022. And then here are the holes that she cut. Here are the samplings of these fabrics and cuts that she made, and be able to point out to the jury more lies that the Commonwealth tried to tell. And the defense keeps having to bring the truth in. And so the defense is not here darkening or shadowing any truth. They're the ones who are bringing the truth and the evidence out. And it's odd that the evidence is more on the side of the on the defense. Usually it's more with the prosecution, the state, the Commonwealth, because they're the ones that have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And in this case, it is backwards. Let's listen to this last bit and then we will wrap this video up. I'm going to mute myself.
Common sense in the equation when you consider any evidence?
Well, you can sit back or step back and look at whether what someone's claiming makes sense in the bigger picture.
So when you have common sense and you look at the big picture, it's not just physics. It's considering all of the evidence, right?
Well, it depends what you're looking at. Certain parts of it, the biomechanical analysis, you look at the physics. It tells you what it is. I mean, if you don't like it and you don't think it fits, well, sorry, it is what it is. That's the science. So you have to step back. I mean, you can look at the bigger picture if things make sense. You know, if somebody was standing on the side of the road with their arm like this, well, an SUV backed up at them and they didn't flinch or they didn't put their arm up. That's kind of the smell test, bigger picture. That doesn't make sense. But the physics, you can't deny it. You have to accept what science tells you.
You can't deny it. That's the line you were laughing about in the documentary. Is one of your answers that we were all celebrating. Objection.
The objection sustained.
How'd that tell us right, sir? How'd it break that one?
How did? Oh, I don't know. There's no evidence of how it broke.
I have no further questions.
All right, you're all set, Dr. Rentschler.
Oh my gosh, I didn't show it. Sorry, let me do that again. I don't think y'all heard that. So let me do it again real quick. Sorry about that. Okay, let me go back. Okay, we're going to start this again because I don't think y'all heard it and I didn't bring up the video, so it was quiet. So I'm so sorry. I apologize. He's going to ask him about, do you use common sense? And basically he's trying to say, is this Occam's razor? Usually the simplest answer is the answer. Well, usually, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's a 1%, sometimes it's a higher percentage, but just because something looks one way doesn't mean it is, and you have to look at all of the evidence. You have to look at the big picture. You can't just focus on the small details. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as soon as we just replay this when we wrap up. So here we go, and I am going to mute myself again.
Sit back or step back and look at whether what someone's claiming makes sense in the bigger picture.
So when you have common sense and you look at the big picture, it's not just physics. It's considering all of the evidence, right?
Well, it depends what you're looking at. To certain parts of it, the biomechanical analysis, you look at the physics. It tells you what it is. I mean, if you don't like it and you don't think it fits, well, sorry, it is what it is. That's the science. So you have to step back. I mean, you can look at the bigger picture if things make sense. If somebody was standing on the side of the road with their arm like this, well, an SUV backed up at them and they didn't flinch or they didn't put their arm up. That's kind of the smell test, bigger picture. That doesn't make sense. But the physics, you can't deny it. You have to accept what science tells you.
You can't deny it. That's the line you were laughing about in the documentary. Is one of your answers that we were all celebrating. Objection.
The objection sustained.
How'd that tell us right, sir? How'd it break that one?
How did? Oh, I don't know. There's no evidence of how it broke.
I have no further questions.
All right, you're all set, Dr. Rentschler.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Like I said, no evidence of how that taillight broke. You have to look at everything. And that is the thing that I think a lot of the anti or people that think that Karen Read is guilty is they're like, but there was taillight and she was drunk. Okay, but you have to look at everything. And for a case to go together and to convict somebody, all the puzzle pieces have to go together. And here in this case, you have some puzzle pieces that fit together. And then it's like the rest of your puzzle has pieces from something else. Like you got an incomplete puzzle that was mixed up. And the rest of your puzzle is somewhere in another box. But your puzzle pieces don't all fit together. And you can look at one singular piece of evidence and you can say, oh, that looks bad for Karen. Or, oh, this looks good for Karen. But when you can't explain all of those things, they'll say, she was drunk, she drove backwards, and she hit him. But where's the proof of that? She went backwards at some point, at some time. her car went backwards. We don't know if it was wheel slippage and the wheels were just spinning. We don't know if she actually went backwards. We don't know how the bumper glass got there because it's not the glass that was found near his body. It's some other glass that was never photographed. And we don't know where that glass came from. And one piece off the bumper glass matched that, but then the rest of the pieces don't match any of those. We have holes in the arm of the sweatshirt, but we have 36 abrasions, 9 holes. There are tiny shards of microscopic pieces no bigger than a grain of rice in John O'Keefe's sweatshirt, but we also have that the sweatshirt and taillight pieces at one time were put in the same bag and they weren't separated out. So is that how taillight shards got onto or into the hoodie? They said that they did the scrapings, but they also just emptied out the debris from the bag and then they put all that stuff into a 10. So do we really know where those shards came from? Was it the bag? Was it the shirt? Why wasn't the shirt handed over when they came to swab and get testing from the red Solo cups and they were given what else were they given? I don't remember what else they were given, but why didn't they give them the clothes that day? Why didn't they give them some of the taillight pieces? Why weren't those given until much later? Months later. So that's the thing, is all the pieces have to fit together in order to convict. And if only half of the pieces go together and half of the pieces don't, or even a fourth of the pieces go together and the rest of them don't, you have to vote not guilty. The only way you vote guilty is if your puzzle is complete with all the pieces intact and there could be no other explanation. And we don't have that here because of the bad police investigation. But we have people doing science and looking at medical things, and they're telling you this isn't what happened. If you don't like it, tough shit. You have to accept it whether you want to or not. But some people are like, nah, doesn't matter. I'm going to believe what I want to believe. I don't care what the evidence shows. This is why when some people's parents and loved ones are convicted of things, they're like, well, I know the person and they wouldn't do that. And it's like, yeah, but all the evidence said that they did. So how can you not look at everything and think that? The evidence shows you the story. And it's just not the story that the Commonwealth wants to tell. And it's like, sorry about your bad luck. You need to talk to other people because this isn't how it happened. So other people have some explaining to do. That is it for our last witness in the Karen Read trial. And I will upload I will upload the verdicts and possibly opening and closing statement. I'll probably do a video breaking that down as well. And then we will have all the videos for you in the playlist. So if anybody ever wants to come back and watch it, they can, even though we already know the outcome of this trial. But I will see you guys later. Bye.